3:30, so we're going to go ahead and start now. Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole. I work in the WRC as a support specialist, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about using Atelier with source control. Specifically, we're going to be working today. I'll start by going over some of the basics of Atelier, which might be familiar to some of you if you've been in some of the previous presentations. We'll talk about source control in general and Git more specifically. Then I'll show you what the local files look like for an Atelier project and also for a Git local repository. We'll go over some of the general Git workflow, which is pretty applicable to a lot of version control systems. And I will show you a demo where I actually use the EGit plugin in my Atelier environment. All right, starting right on the basics of Atelier. Atelier is InterSystems' new development environment. It is available as either an Eclipse plugin or a standalone application. So that means you can go and just install the application right off the website, or if you already have Eclipse or want to install Eclipse, you can add it as a plugin just the way you would any other Eclipse plugin. There are a few big differences between Atelier and our previous development environment, Studio, still kind of current development environment. And the big difference here is that the code that you're working with when you're using Atelier is a local copy of the code from source. So in Studio, you're working directly with the server version of your code, but in Atelier, you're copying from the server or from source control into a local project on your local file system, and that's the code that you're actually working with. Another difference between Atelier and Studio is that with Atelier, your source code, the code that you're working with locally, is now stored in UDL format, which is a more human-readable format than XML. It really looks just like what you're looking at when you're editing your code. With a move to Atelier, you are making a move towards a modern development environment. One big difference is that Cache is no longer your development environment. Atelier is now your development environment. Cache is just the deployment environment. In a modern development environment, you are going to be using source control. Hopefully some of you are already. And so that's really the reason for this presentation is with a more modern system, with Atelier, we hope everyone is going to be using source control. It's a whole lot easier now. Eclipse has the ability to connect to a lot of different version control systems through different plugins. And Git is a really popular example of a version control system, one that's used with Eclipse a whole lot. And that's the one that I'm going to be focusing on in this presentation here. For those of you who used source control in Studio, I want to go over just sort of the general way that that worked and how that differs from using a source control system with Atelier now. In order to connect a version control system to your environment when you were using Studio, you had to write your own custom server-side source code hooks. They could be a pain. I mean, it's a lot of work up front. And the reason is that a version control system connects to some folder that stores your files, and those files are what you're creating with the source control hooks as you're saving in Studio. Because a version control system doesn't have any concept of a cache.dat file. So you sort of had to do something to separate your classes and routines, CSP files, out of that .dat and into some folder that could be connected to version control. As I mentioned before, Atelier is it's already storing a local copy of the files that you're working with in UDL format. So that step is already taken care of when you're using Atelier as your development environment, and you can hook up a version control system right to that project folder that you're working in. So Atelier and a Git local repository are both storing files on your local file system. So I'll show you what those both look like. First, we'll focus on just how Atelier is storing your local copies of the code that you're working with. In the next couple of diagrams, you're going to see directories in green boxes and files in the white boxes. So you're going to start at the top level directory, which is called your Atelier workspace. When you first launch Atelier, you'll get a little prompt that asks you to enter some local directory where you're going to be storing any files that you're working with. So where do you want your workspace to be? So that's all wherever you decide to put that locally. Underneath your workspace, every time you create an Atelier project, a new directory will automatically be created for that particular project. That's also going to automatically create a project file, which is going to just have all sorts of configuration information about that particular project. And this is also, under the project, is where you are copying your versions of the code that you're working with, and that's where they'll be stored on the file system as well. The way we store that code right now is that your packages are going to be directories, and then the actual code is in a file underneath. So in this example here, I've copied the sample.person class into a project that I named Atelier Project 1. And you see that stored in a directory called sample, and the actual class code is in a UDL file called person.class. You can have as many projects as you want underneath that workspace, and you'll see similar formatting under all of those. So how does that actually fall into how a Git local repository is stored? With Git, your top-level directory is now called your working directory. Directly under that, you've got a Git folder, and this is what has all of your configuration information about that particular Git local repository. Also, at the root of your working directory is where you'll find the Atelier project folder, which has all the same things that we just looked at on the previous slide. Now, what do you actually do when you're working with Git? I'm going to start with just sort of the simplest workflow with a local Git repository. You are starting on your local machine where you create your first local repository. You can start with an empty repository, or you have the option of cloning an entire remote repository or just pulling some pieces of some remote repository to get started. Then when you're working with that code, you're making changes, and you are committing your changes locally when you're happy with them. And once you're ready to actually show those changes to the world, you push those out to some remote repository. And there could be a whole lot more arrows on all these diagrams. It's all sort of a cycle here that you can go back, commit, make some more changes, commit again, decide you want to push, go back and make more changes locally. You get the idea there. More typically, when you use Git, you will be using the concept of branching. So what is a branch? It's just a copy of some object that you've got in your source control. Your master branch is the main development branch, and that is where you will eventually merge other branches into. But why would you actually want to create a new branch? And the reason is sort of organization. It allows you to separate out different projects that all share the same common code base. The two big reasons that people will create a new branch is either for a new feature that you're implementing or to fix a bug. And you can be creating multiple branches simultaneously. So if you're working on some new feature and you get a report that there's a bug you need to fix, you can create a new branch, work on that bug, check that all in, and go back to the project that you were working on for that new feature in that branch that you had created. So now let's take a look at the diagram with some added boxes taking branching into account. This looks a lot more complicated. There are really only a few more boxes here. Once you create that local repository, instead of going right in and making changes, you'll create a new branch to work in. You'll switch to that branch so that it's the active branch that you're doing your work in. That's where you'll make changes and commit changes. And once you're happy with the changes that you've made for that particular project in that branch, you'll merge the branch with the master branch, your main development branch, and then you'll push the master branch out to the remote repository. All right, now the fun stuff. We'll go into the demo where I'll actually show you guys how easy it is to use the EGit plugin. We're going to use that to create both a local repository, and we'll also create a remote repository in GitHub. We're going to commit some changes to the local repository. We'll use branching there, and we'll push changes out to the remote repository. All right, so here I am starting in my Atelier. My Atelier workbench here is this page that I'm looking at in the Atelier perspective. I've already entered the location for my workspace. I can see the name of my workspace up top here, Workspace Beta. I've already installed the EGit plugin for Eclipse, which you can get just from by looking up the URL for a repository, a software site, and entering that into Eclipse. If anyone has questions about how to do that, there's lots of information online, or come find anyone at the Tech Exchange, and we're happy to talk about that. But for now, just trust me, I have the EGit plugin installed here on my system. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to set up this perspective so that I've got a few of the views that will be useful while I'm using Git. The way I add a new view is I go up here to my window menu, show view. The ones I want aren't actually listed here, so I've got to go to other. The first view I want to add is the Git repositories view. And this just has a whole bunch of information about the local repository that I will be creating. I'm going to actually, this one I use a lot and refer to a lot, so I'm going to move that into a more prominent location over here. The next view, which I'm going to add in the same way, is the Git staging view, and this is going to come in handy when I'm actually committing changes locally. And the final view that I want to add is called the history view, and you use that just to see a file's revision history. So now let's go in and create a new Atelier project and add some code. So here in my Atelier Explorer, I can just right-click and create a new Atelier project. I'll call that my Global Summit project, and I pick a server. I'll pick my InterSystems Iris instance that I have installed, and a namespace that this is connected to. I'll finish that, and now I can see my project listed here under the Atelier Explorer. I want to add a new class, so when I right-click the project, I can go to New Class File, and I'll give this class a really exciting name here. And you can see here that my project was automatically filled in, but I want this to be in the Global Summit project that I just created. When I hit Finish, now in the Atelier editor, I can see the class that I just created. I want to add something to it, so let's throw a property in here. And I'll save that off, and quickly I want to show you guys what that looks like on my local file system. So if I go here to my workspace, which is, again, just in a location that I configured when I launched Atelier, I can see that the two projects listed in my Atelier Explorer in the top left here are also listed in the Finder here. So I've got this project I had before and the GS project that I'm working on now. Under the project, again, we see that project file that I mentioned earlier, and here is my user package as a directory, and that class underneath it, which is, again, a UDL file, and I can open that up, and you can see here that this looks just like what I'm looking at in my Atelier editor. So right now, I haven't actually incorporated Git into anything yet, and the way I do that is if I right-click on this project again and go all the way down here to my team menu. Team is sort of an Eclipse word for source control things. So here under my team menu, I can share this project with a local Git repository. I don't have one created already. I'm going to create a new one. This asks, where do you want that local Git repository? So where is that working directory that we were talking about? I'll put that here under my GS local repo and hit finish and finish there. I can see now in the Git repositories view, I actually have a repository listed now because I just created one. If I drop that down, there's some information here. If I drop down branches, I can see everything's empty right now because while I've shared this project with my local Git repository, I haven't actually committed any of the changes that I've made to that local repository. And before I actually commit changes, I want Atelier or Eclipse to have some identifying information about me so that I know that in this client, I am the person making these changes so that the changes I commit will have sort of a signature that goes along with them. And I'll do that here in my Atelier preferences under team. Again, this menu is called team. There's a Git folder underneath that. And under my configuration information, I can add some user settings here. And what I'll add is a user.name and user.email. I'll apply those, and I can see I've got my name and email address listed here. So now, like I said, when I commit changes, they will be linked with my user with this information. So now when I actually want to commit the changes from this project, I can right-click on my project. And again, I'll go to that team menu, but you'll see now it's a lot more interesting than it was before because it is actually linked with a local repository. So that gives me a lot more functionality here. What I want to do is I want to commit my changes. And down here, you can see this changed focus to my Git staging view. Under unstaged changes, I've got a few files here, and the reason they pop up in unstaged changes is because they've been flagged by the EGit plugin as files that differ from my local project that I'm working in and the local repository that that's shared with. And it's going to make me manually pull those changes from unstaged into staged changes, saying these are the files that I want to commit to my local repository. Give that a good commit message, and hit the commit button. If you look back over on the left to that Git repositories view now, I can drop down my local branch, and I see that I've got this master branch. And next to it, I'm not sure how well you guys can see the little writing from the back there, but this is the master branch, and next to it I can see my most recent commit message next to that. So it sort of gives you an idea of where you are in that particular branch. The next thing that I want to do is actually create a branch because I want to work with these files, but I don't want to work with the files until I have a project branch created for those. And to do that, I'm going to right-click on my local branches, and I will switch to a new branch, which I can name anything I want. Let's just call it a bug fix. And there's a checkbox down here that says check out new branch, which is currently checked. So when I hit finish here, that created this bug fix branch. And there's also a little tiny checkbox next to that saying this is the branch you currently have checked out. This is the branch you're working in right now. So let me open up this user class again, and I'll make some change and save that off. Once I save that in my Git staging view, I can see that file has again been flagged in my unstaged changes because I just changed it in my local Atelier project, but I haven't yet committed that to my local Git repository. So I'll pull that into staged changes and give that a commit message and commit. So now I can see under my Git repositories view here, the bug fix branch now has the newest commit message written next to it. And once I'm happy, I say that fixed the bug that I was working on. I'm ready to merge this branch back into my master branch. I'll check out the master branch by right-clicking it and hitting the checkout option. Again, you see this little check mark, or maybe you don't see in the back, but this little check mark just switched from the bug fix branch back to my master branch. And I will right-click that bug fix branch, and I want to merge that branch. There it is. So I want to actually merge that branch with the master. Now that I've merged that branch with my master branch, I don't really care about it anymore. I don't need this hanging around. I'll just delete the branch. Here in the history view that I added, I will now, once I select my, my local Git repository, again, I right-click on it. I want to show in the history view. Now I can see some interesting information about both of the commits I've done, that initial commit and when I changed the data type of my property. Down here in the bottom right of that view, I can see all of the files that were changed for that particular commit. And if I click on the file, I also get a nice text diff of, well, nice for this little change, not always so nice, a text diff of what I actually did with that particular commit. So everything we've done so far has been local to my file system. So I've been working in my Atelier project, which is a local copy of the files, and I've been working with a local Git repository. In what we're actually going to want to do when we're working with source control is share that code with other developers, with other people on the team, or just store it in a separate some remote location that can be used as backup in case I lose all my local files for whatever reason. So that is going to involve a remote repository, which I'm going to create over here in GitHub because it's really easy. I'm currently logged into GitHub, and I have this option to create a new repository. So I'll click on that. I will give it a name. I'll call that my Global Summit Remote Repository. Create repository, and now I'm done here. What this gives me is a URL that I can use to tell Atelier, to tell that local Git repository where I want to push when I push to a remote repository. So I'll right-click and copy that, hop back over to Atelier here, and now when I right-click on my local Git repository, I have an option to push branch master. So I'm going to push that master branch, and a cool thing that Eclipse does for you is to fill in the URI location of your remote repository. It just pulls whatever's in your clipboard. So I didn't have to type, you see, I didn't have to do anything there. It just filled that right in based on what was in my clipboard. That automatically populates the host and repository path information. And I also have my username and password to access my GitHub account stored in secure storage in Eclipse. So I didn't really have to do anything here to just push the master branch. I'll just take all my defaults here. And this is my last confirmation screen saying, do I want to push my local master branch onto the remote repository as a new master branch? And I do. So I'll finish that up, and we'll wait for that to happen. And here we go. That was successfully pushed. Now I'll prove to you guys that I actually did something on my remote repository. So here in GitHub, if I select this code tab again, now you can see that I have this, the Global Summit project that I had created. Underneath that are all the files that I had added, and this user directory underneath, which is my class. Again, the UDL format. It looks just like that file that I showed you on my local file system. And if I click on that in GitHub, I can see the text of that file. Now, when you're working with other developers, they're also going to be making changes. So I'm just going to mimic another developer pushing a change to this remote repository by actually editing it manually within GitHub, but pretend like someone else did this. So I can go in, edit my file. Let's change this property type back to a string. And when I scroll down, again, I have the option to add a commit message and commit this change. And I'll commit that. So now within my remote repository, my property in this class is a string again. When I go back to Atelier, I do not see that change picked up automatically. The way that I get changes from a remote repository is to pull those changes manually by right-clicking on my local repository, picking the pull option, I get a success message. We can see that it's pulled that most recent commit with the message changing P1 back to a string, which was committed in GitHub by this Nicole Aaron 11 person. And now in now my local version of this code, I can also see that that is a string type here. Okay, so that's it for the demo. Oh yeah, got a question. If you don't mind grabbing the mic for any questions, that's going to help with the recording later. So if someone could grab him the mic, or if you want to grab that.
I'll be loud enough.
Okay.
If you have already checked out that file and say you have added another property or something, so is it going to the file? There'll be conflict in the file.
Right, so the question was about what happens if you are working with a file where it's changed remotely and you're sort of reconciling the differences between what you've checked
in the local file as well as in the remote file if there are differences.
Right, so the Git plugin does have some conflict resolution options. So what I showed you is all sort of the simplest version, and I think it's called fast forward changes is what was popping up in a lot of those boxes as when I was pushing and pulling. I was getting a fast forward because there weren't any problems, but if there are some places where there are conflicts, you'll get a manual. You'll get some manual information that you can.
Can you configure your own, say Beyond Compare or anything like file comparison software with this Atelier, like the external?
That I don't know that for sure. Generally the answer is if it's available for Eclipse, it is available for Atelier. So if that is an Eclipse plugin out there, then yes, but I'm not sure because that would specifically be managed by the Git plugin. So I don't know that the Git plugin would let you add in some other software to it for file comparison.
So you use github.com as a repository.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the general approach to things, or do corporations usually have their own internal Git repository server?
I definitely don't know for sure. I don't know if people have experience with that. It's not something that I was too familiar with before learning Atelier about a year ago. But I think probably a mix. I used GitHub because it's a really easy way to create a remote repository.
But it's certainly possible to have your own.
Certainly possible. Okay. Yeah, I know within InterSystems we have our own source control system that we're using.
Did you have any exploration of using Maven or Gradle to resolve dependencies between various libraries that you could have built in ObjectScript?
I have not used them before.
Anybody in InterSystem have?
Or? That I don't know, but if you come find me after in the Tech Exchange, I can ping some people and see. We can find the Atelier developers in the Tech Exchange and ask if they know about that.
So how would you move code from one environment to another?
So how do we move code from one environment to another?
Yep,
That
so
is
QA to dev to prod.
So the typical way, go to Ben's presentation later. So the typical way is you can have, is back in Atelier, I'll actually just go back to Atelier and show you. You can have multiple servers configured. So here in my server explorer, I've got a couple of servers that I'm connected to. Both of these are just local instances. And so my project here is currently connected to the InterSystems Iris data platform that I've got installed here. And I can see that down here. It's the name of the server connection that I'm currently connected to with this project. And what you can do is you can edit this project, if I can find where, edit connection. And I can pick a different server connection that this is connected to, that this is configured to push to. Okay, Ben wants to answer.
I'm sorry, I'm heard this thing. You wouldn't want to do this outside of source control. So you would either want a waterfall approach with multiple branches within source control for your dev and your test and production, or you'd actually want like a continuous integration build type of environment where you'd actually build artifacts out of source control Sergey is doing the more complex using percent installer to build everything from scratch. So I'd encourage you to find out a lot more about those questions tomorrow afternoon starting at 2 this week.
Okay, so you basically are you using like Ant or Maven for like doing your deployment packaging?
No, I'm not. And internally we don't for internal applications, but I know there are some customers that are, and there may be some customers at this conference that do. Do you have an answer to that?
Well, the new way to do things is just to create a Docker image based on whatever status of your source control is, and then once you ready, you mark the Docker image as the latest stable version, and then with that tag you can just update all of your provisioning like environments depending on how many servers and what configuration you use from the Docker repository. And we will have a few sessions on how to use Docker where we will cover this in more details. And we will have my session where I will cover how to use Jenkins to automatically build things with Docker.
Okay. Security-wise, is there anything in Atelier to stop someone from going straight into prod with a code change?
Great question. If you have server-side hooks, and tomorrow we'll go into server-side versus client-side, if you have server-side hooks set up, you can rely on those for protection of pushing changes. As long as you're on 17.2 or the yet to be unreleased version, the next release of the maintenance kits is 16.2 or 17.1. There's actually a pretty bad bug in there. So in the meantime, what you should do is disable the Atelier REST web service in test, in UAT, and in line, and prod, to prevent someone from Atelier firing up and actually pushing it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there's another question back there if someone wants to grab the mic.
Thank you. So in this example that we did, none of the code has actually gone to the cache that file right now, right? It's all in the local and then it goes to the Git.
So I actually have it configured automatically to be going to the cache server, but you actually, so with Atelier gives you the option when you save, what do you want a save to do? Do you want that to just save locally? Do you want that to save locally and synchronize synchronize with the server version of the code? Do you want it to save, synchronize, and actually compile on the server? So I currently have save, synchronize, and compile on, which is the default. So when I save changes, they are automatically the changes are being made on the server as well. So that's all configurable.
It first gets compiled and then goes to the server, correct?
Well, it's compiling on the server.
Atelier can't compile code.
Oh, it doesn't have a compiler? Okay.
Yeah, all the compilation is happening on the server side.
Okay, but if it fails, it won't save the file, right? If the
I think
compilation fails.
it will save the changes, but it's failed compilation. So the same in Studio, there's a separate save and compile. If you just hit the compile button, you're automatically saving and compiling, but you're saving your changes. It's just that the code is errored out in compile.
Okay, okay.
And that'll all pop up. So in the console view, I don't know if you guys were paying attention to all of the views at once, as I expected you to be. But when I was saving those changes to my class, it was jumping from whatever view I had focus on currently to the console view. And the console view is what outputs the information from a compilation. So that's the reason that it was switching to my console view, is because when I saved, I was automatically compiling on the server because that's what my settings say to do. And once I compile on the server, I'm getting the compilation message back in the console. So you'll see, the whatever output you would see in the Studio output window, you'll see that same thing in the console in Atelier. So you do get immediate feedback on it. And there's a different icon next to your class when you have when you fail compile. There are many different icons that can pop up for different reasons in that Atelier Explorer for that file.
So in this situation where there are two developers, you could be updating code on the cache side, but not on the Git, because you're not pushing your local code. But your local code will always go to cache, because you're choosing to synchronize it on save, right?
I'm choosing to, right. But you can just have a save your local copy and have a separate manual process to synchronize and compile.
So wouldn't you ideally have it go to cache when you actually push the code to Git?
then you wouldn't know if it worked or not because you would have never compiled.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have been able to test before you
We
actually
come to
were
the first
committing
question
and
then.
pushing your
You
changes
should always
that way.
save code when it's compiled.
You always what?
You always save code when it's compiled.
You have to save before the attempts to be compiled. You save the file to your file system, then it pushes that file across to your server, and that's where the compilation happens. So it's saved as a prerequisite for compilation.
Okay, so an uncompiled code would never get saved on the cache side. On the local repository, you don't care about the local repository. You care about the source code that's on the cache side and on the Git, right? And you want always the code on these two repositories to be compilable.
Okay, so if you're using client-side source control, which is what Nicole demonstrated, there's no source code repository on the server, on the cache side. All that acts as is a compilation engine and then a runtime engine. So if you're doing the client-side source control, it's going to be saving it to your local workspace. It's going to take that file, it's going to push it. It's just going to tell you the results of the compilation coming back from the server. The other mode of working is server-side source control modes, where you're actually working directly against source control on the server. That's what my session covers tomorrow.
Okay.
But that, you can be pushing code, and then that is exporting on the server side, and that's from there you actually put it into source control. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So ideally, you would only have your team work on one of the two tools, either Cache Studio or Atelier. They cannot use, half the team cannot be using Atelier and half the team cannot be using
They
Cache.
can, and I'll show you how to do it.
There would be conflicts, I think.
No conflicts, because if
Okay.
you can use both the server
I look
side-
forward to the session. Thank you.
Yeah, so Ben Speed's session tomorrow talks a lot of shared development environments.
I'd like to say this is awesome.
I'm glad to hear that. I think so too.
Where I, where I work, we have a software control problem. Is there somebody that I could talk to help us out on fixing that? Because I think Atelier is.
Ben would love to help you with
Okay.
that. But yes, I mean, in general, I mean, especially here, you have a ton of people at your disposal to talk to. You can talk to people in the tech exchange. So we've got support advisors, learning services, and the Atelier development team in there. You can find Ben, who is very interested in this topic, clearly. You can flag me down anytime. In general, you can talk to InterSystems sales team. You can talk to the WRC. That might be a little bit big of a design project for the WRC, but if you open a support issue, we can always find the right people for you to talk to.
Well,
If
in
it's
my
not us.
case, I'm part of the VA, so it's not simple as me just running it.
So talk to Thomas.
Thomas.
Well, anyone on the government support
Like
team
Renee
can
Cannon,
direct you.
would she be one of them?
Yep, Renee. Yeah, you can definitely talk to Renee. Yeah, anyone on your sales team, anyone in support that you talk to, you can always reach out to any of us and we'll find the right person for you to talk to if you don't know who that is. So never hesitate to just, open a support case or shoot an email to someone on your sales team and say, hey, I have this problem, please help, and someone will come and help you.
Oh, okay. So I guess I can go see Renee then.
Yeah, I mean, and again, you can certainly talk to us in general with the high level stuff. I don't know exactly what limitations we might run into because you are a government customer, but in general, I mean, while you're here, flag down anyone from InterSystems, and we'll find you the right person to talk to.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, another question.
In the current version of Studio, what we are using, one class can be linked with the multiple projects, right? What will happen if in the Git project, the one class is linked with multiple Git projects?
If one class is linked with what?
Is it possible if that one class is linked with multiple Git projects?
Yes, you can have multiple Atelier projects working with the same
So if one person-
copies of, it's different copies of code. So each project, it can all be from the same server, the same version of code from the server, or whatever version it was when you copied it to your project. But like we saw earlier on your local file system, so the file that you're working with when you're in that project, those are stored in separate, the UDL file for that local copy that you're editing is stored in a directory for the project that you're working on it in. So if you're working on, if you've got if you got sample.person from the same server that you're working on in project 1 and project 2, and you change it in project 1, save that, compile it on the server so that the server version is different, over in project 2, you're going to get, there'll be one of those little icons that pops up next to your files to tell you that it's now out of sync with the server version.
Okay.
And when you make a change, you'll also run into a sort of a conflict resolution wizard saying, hey, the server-side code changed from what you had. What do you want to do with it? Do you want to save the local copy or the server copy? Here's what changed.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
All right, I have a few more slides to run through, and then we'll have maybe a couple minutes for questions, for some more questions if you guys have them. I'll run through the review pretty quickly in case there are more questions because we're running low on time. We talked about what Atelier is. It's our new development environment here at InterSystems. We briefly looked at source control in Studio versus Atelier. Again, if you want to talk more about the Studio source control hooks, Ben Speed's presentation is a great place for that. We looked at Git and Atelier projects. Yes?
Is the server-side source control hooks just for Studio?
No. The question is, are server-side source control hooks only for Studio? And they are not. It's all on the, since it's all server-side, yeah, it's dependent on. It was just, they were necessary to use source control when you were using Studio, but you can still use them. All right, we did some Git workflow overview and actually looked at that in Atelier. Let's get through these real quick and then we'll see if there are more questions. So where do you go now if you want to learn more? We covered this a little bit. While you're here, go to the Tech Exchange. You can find the Atelier development team. You can find me. I'll also be in the Tech Exchange most of the time. We'll all be around also if you just want to pull us aside and ask us any questions. There are a bunch of Atelier presentations coming up. There are a bunch of Atelier presentations specific to source control coming up. We've got Ben Speed's presentation. You've got Sergey's presentation. There's a couple links here to just some helpful documentation to the Atelier product page, which also has a link to the Atelier documentation. There's some videos there. That's where you can go to the download page if you want to get the standalone application. And after the conference, again, ask any questions you want of the WRC. Feel free to open up a support case with us anytime. You can talk to your sales team, of course, and the developer community is also a great resource. It's very active for Atelier. There is an Atelier group here that I listed there, but it's also easy to find under the groups on the developer community. But we have a lot of customers who are really active there. The developers are paying attention to that. In support, we're all paying attention to that. So that's another good place to ask questions that might be useful or sort of brainstorming things, things that you would like to share with your fellow developers. Don't forget to fill out a survey using the conference app. And that's all I've got. So if there are any more questions, it's 4:13, so feel free to file out, ask questions, come grab me, what have you. But thank you, guys.